WrestleMania, the Amiga's answer to WrestleFest. Or is it? We are officially in WrestleMania season, and as both a wrestling and gaming fan, I am in the mood for a wrestling video game to scratch a double itch. But I'm not going to dive into WWE 2K24, nor am I going to hit a one-winged angel on AEW Fight Forever. No, instead I'm going to go back to the very first wrestling game I ever played, WrestleMania on the Amiga 500. I recently did a video covering the Dreamcast Royal Rumble game, and so now it's got me wanting to check out more classic wrestling video games. I just think there's something about the old school ones which just is completely lost on the modern games. They're all too complicated with hundreds of playable wrestlers, creator wrestler modes, thousands of match type, 50-hour story season modes, and sometimes I just want to play some wrestling games that can be done in 20 minutes. Now, if you've never played WrestleMania for the Amiga, and this game also came out, I believe, on the Atari ST and maybe Commodore 64 or other platforms as well, but today we'll be looking at the Amiga one. Well, just looking at it will give many gamers a huge vibe of WWF Superstars and WWF WrestleFest, the arcade games. And yes, some of you will be shocked at the idea that you never realised that WrestleFest was ported to home computers. Well, I'm afraid if that's what you're thinking, WrestleMania on the Amiga will undoubtedly disappoint you. Because this isn't a port, and it's not even really anything in terms of being WrestleFest. It just kind of looks like it, and that's about as good as you're going to get. As this was the first game I ever played though, I didn't know that the game didn't live up to WrestleFest. I'd seen it in wrestling magazines, and I'd seen it at the arcade, and I just saw this on my Amiga and poured hours into it. Now, coming back to it in recent years, I found the game a lot harder to play than I remember. But as I'll get to by the end of this video, I'll reveal how I've been able to enjoy it more than I'd ever enjoyed it before. The game is as bare bones as it comes. The game only features 8 WWF Superstars, and of those, only 3 are playable. And no, this isn't like the situation in modern WWE times where Brock Lesnar is in 2K24, but a month before its release, they made him a non-playable character because of controversy. No, this was from an era where you'd only be able to play as the babyface good guy wrestlers, and all of the bad guys or heels would be the opponents. The game allows you to play as Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and the British Bulldog. You can then either pick practice mode to get used to the controls, or you can go after the belt. The WrestleMania belt, as Sergeant Slaughter calls it in the game, not even the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. So then when you go after the belt, you'll first go against Mr. Perfect, followed by the Warlord, the $1 Million Man Ted Dibiase, the Mountie, and finally Sergeant Slaughter, in that order. I'll be honest, coming back to this today, this gave me a sense of where these wrestlers ranked in my head, and why it took me years to realise that Mr. Perfect wasn't just the opening match guy. Why is it that the Mountie is the penultimate challenger instead of Ted DiBiase? I don't know. Of course, I can understand that this was developed and released at the time when Sergeant Slaughter was the anti-American character during the Gulf War, the WWF World Champion, and so it made sense for Slaughter to be the final boss. The graphics of the game really do look like a third game in the chain of WWF Superstars and WrestleFest, and this is one of the game's biggest strengths. I'd love to see a new game made in this visual style, but other than a WrestleFest game that was made for mobile phones about 10 or more years ago, it's never really been revisited. It's worth noting that the ring is huge, and it really doesn't need to be. It's not like there's a Royal Rumble mode like you'd have in WrestleFest, and that would benefit from the extra space for more people to fight in. No, it is just ginormous. In terms of gameplay, there's very little in way of wrestling moves or holds that you can pull off. The full list, if you're ready for this, and no, this won't be like Chris Jericho listing off each of the Man of 1,000 moves, Dean Malenko's 1,000 moves in that classic WCW clip. No, the move list goes as follows. You can punch, kick, stomp, hit a running elbow smash, a drop kick off the top rope, and pin your opponent. You can also pick up a steel chair outside the ring, and that's about it. Well, not quite. Allow me to explain. I've played this game a few times over the years, but every time I've returned to it since I first played it as a child, it was either on my original Amiga, or in more recent years via emulation on PC, or using my A500 Mini or Analog Pocket. Now, if you play this on original hardware with a joystick, you'll get on fine enough. But if you play this game on anything with a D-pad as your control method, you will find the game is much harder to play. Now, the reason for this is because you will frequently find yourself in a grapple, or a collar and elbow tie-up to use the wrestling vernacular, where you'll be able to pull off special moves. But as this is a very old school wrestling game, instead of you getting into a grapple and then mashing buttons or hitting a combo of buttons to pull off a big move, you have to waggle the joystick left and right rapidly to fill up a meter. Now, this style of control is something that works infinitely easier with a joystick and is almost impossible to win with a D-pad. But if you play with a gamepad, I'm sure you'll still attempt to win with a good old D-pad waggle and just hurt your thumb into the pits of hell in the process. I learned this the hard way over and over again over the years. Now, fortunately, I have a C64 Mini that came with a joystick that is compatible with my A500 Mini, so I was back in business. Or so I thought. I played the game again for this review and found that whilst I may be able to win a grapple or two, I was still getting my butt handed to me by Mr. Perfect and the Warlord. The Warlord will put you into a full Nelson, Sergeant Slaughter will slap on the camel clutch, and Mr. Perfect and others will hit various suplexes and other big moves. Now, if you win a grapple, you'll hit a signature move of Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, British Bulldog, like a gorilla press or a running power slam. But winning an occasional grapple wasn't winning me many matches. So then it got me thinking, am I still attempting to play this wrestling game as I did back when I was a little kid? If I am, maybe that's a mistake. I'm a much more seasoned video game player now. So I figured I'd play it smart, and so swapped out my joystick back for the gamepad. Yes, that's right, the gamepad which I had no success playing this with for all these years was now the saviour. See, this meant that it was almost impossible to win a collar and elbow lockup. I couldn't win any of the grapples, but on the flip side, it made it much easier to pull off running, drop kicks, punches and stomps and climbing the top rope. All of it felt a lot more natural with the gamepad. It just meant I'd have to play a game of don't get into a grapple, because if you do, you're gonna lose. So, normally I'd feel bad for spamming moves and not trying to win the grapples, but really annoyingly, some of the opponents will repeatedly spam grapple moves. The amount of times the Warlord would just pick me up from having put me into the full Nelson just to put me back in another full Nelson was getting ridiculous. It's like they knew I couldn't win a grapple with my gamepad. So if they're going to spam moves, well, why don't I just spam 3 or 4 other moves that I have in my arsenal on them? I mean, if spam is the only food in the kitchen, a guy's still gotta eat after all. Another aspect of this game is that it has the wrestlers cut promos on each other between matches. And if you don't know what a promo is, it's just the wrestling term for an interview. It's promotion. Get it? So they're promoting the match by talking smack. And this is just like a cutscene, and it's not something where you can choose the comeback to say like you would in Monkey Island. That would have been really cool. Imagine if on this wrestling game you could have chose like the smack talk to say back, and then it increases your energy or improves some stat or something. But heck, that might be too much for me to have hoped for from an Amiga game. So as a wrestling fan, I didn't like that there is a 20 count on the outside of the ring to be counted out. I was certain at times I was going to get my opponents counted out, and I'd jump back in the ring at 9 and they'd still be out there until 11, and I'd be like, what the hell? Look, I know some Japanese promotions give a 20 count, and maybe even AEW did when it first began, but in the WWF it's always been a 10 count to get back in. Also, when you see the artwork for Sergeant Slaughter before his match on the promo section, his face looks weirdly stretched, and I couldn't get the fact out of my mind that it looks like the stretched weird face from the beginning of the show The X-Files. When you beat the game, it comes up with an old school style newspaper as the ending of the game before telling you game complete. And on this newspaper, it shows some text which literally just says blah 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 repeatedly. Just an amazing old school sign of humour or lack of effort on the developer's part. Then it will come up with the credits where you can't even get back to the title screen, so you just have to crash the system and start again. But it's all good. You can go back and play this as the Ultimate Warrior, the British Bulldog, or Hulk Hogan. And to be honest, they all play pretty much the same. The only difference would be the special move that you pull off, but because I was playing this with the gamepad instead of the joystick, I couldn't pull off any of them. Now, playing this again, I finally realised that the main part of the game and way to win wasn't all about the grapples as I had thought when I was a lot younger. And because of this, I had a lot more fun with the game than I have every other time I'd ever played it. But truthfully, this is still a very limited game. Wrestling fans will probably get a kick out of it for a short while, but this is still definitely a nostalgia fest only, and probably won't go down well with people who didn't play it in the early 1990s. There are tons of better wrestling games out there, but also there are definitely a few which I'd say are a little bit worse. But this is one that's definitely on the lower end of the scale. Still, it's good that there is a game that lets you play as Warrior, Hogan or Bulldog and just have a fun time beating up the Warlord, who I'm not sure if he's in any other wrestling game, except for maybe Superstars or WrestleFest, but truthfully I can't remember because the Warlord isn't all that memorable. So that's going to wrap things up for this chapter in the evolution of wrestling video games. I started with the Dreamcast and now I have backpedaled right back to my origins, but I will continue this journey and see where it takes us next. And it's worth noting that even though Wrestlemania on the Amiga was a very early entry into the world of wrestling video games, and so therefore is lacking to a modern eye, and is a poor man's WrestleFest compared to what it was back in the day, it's still a bunch of fun, if you can get past the kind of naff controls and lack of content. Now, I've looked at the Amiga version here, but there were versions on other platforms like I mentioned earlier, like the Atari ST, Commodore 64, maybe others as well, so maybe I'll take a look at those other versions in a future video. So let me know in the comments if you played this game back in the day, what were your thoughts on the game then, and what are your thoughts on the game now? And where do you feel this ranks in the realm of wrestling video games overall? So that is going to be the wrap up of things here. If you haven't done so already, I would appreciate if you would body slam that subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. And as always, you can check out the article version of this discussion over at www.xstreamed.tv/gaming. Check out everything else we got on the channel because there's loads of retro reviews across Amiga, Atari, Spectrum, Street Fighter stuff, all sorts of hardware and console reviews, indie games, something for everyone, and we're starting to get more and more documentaries on the channel. So with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, and we're off the air.